Mike Franciscini. I primarily a technician. I've been at Groove Tubes, Rivera, VHT, Wagner, Dietzel USA, Custom Audio Electronics, and now I'm the head engineering person at 65 Amps. And I do repairs, constantly doing repairs of old amplifiers, and just trying to learn, continue to learn, and that's it for me.
I post a lot of pictures live on Facebook and Twitter in real time quite often of some of the stuff that he works on. It was all, he'll bring something and I go, wow, what's that? Take a picture and set it off to the
Good morning, my name is Pat Quilter. I got interested in guitar amplification in 1967 when my brother's bass player couldn't afford a name brand amplifier. I said, well gee, I could make you something, and I had to do everything over twice, but I still made 3 cents an hour on the project. Went on to try to take over the world with giant guitar amps in the late 60s and early 70s. We didn't know enough about running a business at that point, but by the mid-70s we kind of picked ourselves up, decided to go into a more conservative business and started QSC Audio Products, now a leading supplier of PA and Pro Audio type stuff. Well, all these years later, I'm still thinking about guitar amps, so I retired last year and started Quilter Labs. To complete the job I started and never quite finished 40 years ago, trying to bring good tone to a modern, lightweight technology amplifier.
Hi, my name is Simon Higgs. I'm currently a consultant with 65 Amps. My name's Simon Higgs. I'm currently a consultant with 65 Amps. I build their colorless pedals and designing some new pedals. And I also help with the launch of the London Pro Amp. I also run Watkins Amp Forums, which came out of 18watt.com. I don't know if any of you are in the sort of online amp building scene, but what we do is we do a lot of modifications for amps. We do a lot of designs, simple retrofits. We've got a 5E3 Tweed Deluxe printed circuit board that literally drops into a Valve Junior. You used to have to drill 2 more holes for the extra tubes, and then you've got a Tweed Deluxe out of an inexpensive sort of $99 amp.
I'm the underdog here. My name is Terrence Standifer. I run Tone Alchemy. I'm a rig builder. I'm not an amplifier builder, so I'm definitely the underwhelming person here out of all of us. We basically build rigs, racks, pedal boards, and go through and develop switching systems now at this point with Markel Custom USA.
My name is Trace Davis. I'm with Voodoo Amps, and I'm an underdog to him. We are the largest. We're a little different. We actually build, obviously, guitar tube amps with switching systems, everything from 10 watt to 100 watt, multi-channel, single channel, and we do a very great deal of tube amp modifications. And there you go. So I'll give it back to Marcus.
I think Trace came from the farthest away. He's all the way from the other coast. And if you're ever in New York and you see the New York amp show, Trace is generally on the panel of the Tone Wizards at the New York amp show. Anyway, the question I want to open with is a amp designer, developer, builder came up to me before the show and he said, I'm trying to make an amp that really sounds good, but I get 90% of the way there and I can't get, it really to open up and really sound nice and really do the right thing. Do you have any suggestions? It's really an open question, but I said, you're using good components, good capacitors, good transformers. Oh yeah, I'm using all the right stuff. And I said, a couple years ago I took one of my own design amps into the shop and I actually gave it to a guy named Mike Franciscini. And he plugged the amp and took a couple strokes on it. And this is an amp that people like Carl Verheyen and a lot of people had used and said that they really liked. And Mike said, sounds like it's got a poopy diaper. I said, what do you mean? He says, I'm going to dub this the poopy diaper amp. He says, it's trying to produce too much bass and it needs a little cap and it needs to be blah, 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 blah. anyway, the bottom line is sometimes it's not what you put into an amp, it's what you take out of an amp. And I'm going to pass this over to Mike and let him elaborate on this, because a lot of people have been kind of amazed by some of the stuff he does. He does all of the amps for like History for Hire, Ron Cohen Studio Instrument Rentals. I can't even begin to list all the stuff that comes in that he, you know, maintains, restores, and brings back for folks. Anyway.
What was the question?
I don't know. So I pulled it out of the amp cloud.
How to make my amp sound better.
What do you pull out of it? What
A lot.
something's producing too much bass kind of thing.
Well, it's kind of counterintuitive. You know, Fender amps, for instance, are typically have this problem when you hit, you know, bass notes. You play the guitar, da 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 da, and it's because the power supply, the transformer, and the output transformer cannot deliver that note. It's underpowered, and you need more power to make bass. You need a lot more power to make bass. So the definition of the definition of the note, the power supply runs out of energy to make that note. And so typically, when I first started, I go, oh, this amp doesn't have enough bass, so the cap that feeds the phase inverter, I put a bigger cap in there. More bass will get through. It was opposite is true. The opposite is true. A smaller cap. People bring in these amps all the time, and it has a certain value cap, and they complaining about the bass. I put a smaller value capacitor feeding and I have a little box where I go click, 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 and I can hear where the bass tightens up. And put that in there, and they go, oh, you made so much more bass. I didn't make any more bass. I cleaned it up and gave it. I supplied the output section with what it could handle for bass, and it translates sonically that it sounds like the bass is very tight. But it's a common mistake, especially in like Fenders.
That also happens in solid state amps. The power supply can come out and
Well, this is a guy that would know about that.
Feel free to jump. This one is very informal. So
Yeah, and everything he said makes perfect sense to me as an amp designer. First thing is that the whole system's got to kind of maintain an even strain. And if you overdo one part of it and underdo another part, you get kind of an unbalanced result, like he was referring to. And in a tube amp, that coupling cap between the phase inverter and the power tubes does a number of interesting things. But I think the main effect you were looking at is that you were actually rolling the bass off just a little so it didn't overload the output transformer and kept it from going into that kind of grinding, you know, gagging quality that can be part of a sound, but it depends on, you know, what you're looking for. And I think, you know, a lot, even in tube amps, a lot of the practice is, dare I say, kind of infected by residual hi-fi practice. And a larger than normal coupling cap would be a very hi-fi thing to do, because you want, in hi-fi, you want all of your limits to be as far out of the audio spectrum as possible, so that at the end of the day, you're doing the best possible job over the audio range. Of course, a good hi-fi amp would have giant transformers and everything it takes to reproduce those notes. But in a guitar amp, you know, the guitar has a somewhat limited frequency range, and economy and lightweight has always been kind of in the background of a designer's thinking. So it tends to use, you know, kind of mid-fidelity components, and you want to tune the whole amp up to be happy with that. Anybody else?
I'll bite. I'm going to say something a little controversial here. I think that probably 60 to 75% of the tone coming out of your amp is coming out of your fingers. And you can take an amp to 80-90% when you're building it, and a lot of it, you'll find that one person playing that amp is going to have a fantastic sound, and another person just isn't, and that extra may just be coming out of your fingers. I can give you an example. about 20 years ago, I worked for Gibson, and we were launching some amps through Gibson Labs. we sponsored an event at NAMM. We had a stereo chorus combo that we were launching, and we basically had that out for some of the evening gigs. Larry Carlton came in and played it, did a short set with it. It sounded like Larry Carlton. Dave Amado from Ario Speedwagon came out, did all his harmonic picking on it, exactly the same amp, he had his sound. The amp was a good amp. It wasn't a great amp. It was the best way of describing it was a JC120 with the distortion fixed. But I think a lot of the time from amps, you're going to get all the way that you can when you're building it, and the rest is really up to the player.
I want to now. The tone is in your fingers thing. I think a lot of you folks probably understand. I know I do every time I try to play, one of the amps I use.
Yeah, the tone is not in his fingers.
Here's a good example. I just saw Larry Carlton play the Big Potato, not through his guitar and not through his amp, and he couldn't play. And he himself, I was sitting right next to him, and you could tell he was off. And so even though it's Larry Carlton, it was evident to me right away it was not his guitar and not his amp. Good stuff, but not his stuff.
I played through his stuff, Carl Verheyen stuff, Brad Paisley stuff, and I never sound anything like any of them.
Okay, I have an opposite. I was playing a nightclub in Pasadena, I knew the Van Halens, and at the time I had a custom Charvel guitar, a high watt 50 watt head, a 212 Fender bassman cabin from 1960 and some pedals and shit. And he came in and he sat in with the band. And when he played, it sounded just like him. And when I played, I had to sit down. I said, I'm not going to play it, but it was just like the record, and it was not any of the shit that he plays through.
But my point in this case was, I mean, it wasn't that it didn't sound like Larry Carlton. It absolutely did, and it was pretty damn. Him on a bad night was better than just about anyone else. But when you have your gear, when you have your thing, there are stuff that allows you to transcend stuff, and oftentimes if you don't, you can still get through.
Yeah,
But
it's 50 watts of whatever.
And plus, when you're on your own rig, you stop worrying about things, and you can just play. Yeah. And when you're playing something a little unfamiliar, even if it handles okay, you're still exploring it. Sometimes it can let a musician kind of go off in an interesting new direction. That's the magic that an amp builder lives for, is thinking that, gee, I just gave the artist a new color, and look what they're doing with it. But these A-list guys, I mean, they've explored everything to the nth degree, and I mean, they're at such a high level that they're going places that way beyond what the equipment was ever imagined to do. They just we just hope that they have a good night with it.
A lot of the original amps that were made, they were made from whatever components were available at the time. They weren't, $22 capacitors. They weren't, the best things you could find on the market today. So a lot of times it's just the mojo of how it was put together, and pretty much a lot of the classic stuff will have the accidents.
Well, or the designer slaved over it until they did what he's talking about. Just dialed everything in with those actual surplus parts, whatever they got from the store down the street. And when they thought it was good enough to, was best they could make, it went out and it became, a handmade classic. And of course, a lot of the good amps, 90% of the stuff that was made back in the day may not have been that great, and those pieces weren't loved and they weren't preserved, and they were, they went to the landfill at some point. The ones that people really loved because they just turned out good, like good old guitars, those are the ones that have been kept and are now tone standards for us to look at today and try to see, where's the magic, what makes that one so unique.
The radius transforms the old Marshall.
There were good transformers and there were okay transformers. You have to remember these transformers were not machine wound.
Right.
There's great examples of, a lot of these transformers, and there's mediocre examples.
Well, and there's a lot in the transformer design, how you do the layers, how much iron you put in, relative amounts of copper. I mean, it's all an art, and it's a balancing act between weight, cost, a high voltage breakdown, and frequency extension. And you know, every amp designer kind of makes their own decisions on that. Some of them used off-the-shelf transformers, but you know, Fender obviously had custom transformers built that they felt were good. And you know, what I've seen in Marshalls has always been quite a bit bigger, so they had a more of a hi-fi orientation than Leo, who was more sort of, you know, down the middle of the road and looking to clean things up more with tone than with, you know, sheer masses of iron.
You said you designed solid state.
Yes, sir.
The difference that I see between a tube and a solid state is the finger response. How do you deal with that?
Well,
Or am I just dreaming?
no, you're not dreaming at all. You know, electric guitar and a tube amplifiers grew up together, and they were optimized for each other back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that the tube amp evolved to the point where it became the happy companion of the high impedance pickup, you know, thousands of turns of number, whatever it is, wire and all that. When solid state came in, it's a fundamentally, it is a different technology and it behaves differently. Tubes are naturally high impedance. Transistors are naturally low impedance. If you don't do something about that, you're going to get a much different sound. A lot of the advantages of solid state kind of work against what guitar players are looking for. One of the advantages of a transistor is it can get a lot closer to the rail before it hits the ceiling and distorts. Tubes kind of fall short, but there's a lot of kind of wiggle room left on the table. When you hook it up to a real speaker, that shows up as extra frequency range, extra voltage overshoot. It adds a lot of personality to the sound. So if you don't, you know, get your solid state amp to do the same things, it's not going to have that responsiveness and that ability to kind of nip in and out of distortion that people like so much about tube amps, or the warmth that you get in the clean zone and the way it kind of interacts with the speaker to bring out the speaker's tone instead of trying to stifle it, which is, you know, the mission of most hi-fi PA amp designers is to control the speaker and not let it sound like it wants to sound, but make it sound as clean and clear as possible. And, you know, that's, of course, a whole, you know, pro audio is an art form in itself. But, you know, for guitar players, you know, we have these, you know, speakers that have been developed for decades by the, you know, the leading companies, and you want their personality to come through. So a lot of the challenge in a solid state design is getting that warmth, getting that high impedance, and getting it to play well with the speaker.
You know, I found a lot of players don't know or care about impedance matching, and they don't get a very good result. In fact, a lot of people are frustrated because they don't do the calculation. But recently, I found some amplifiers that will dial in the exact impedance, and of course, the ratings when you're looking at speakers and comparing them, they're always nominal impedance. So, at least as far as I know, you can measure the exact impedance at the end of the speaker wire, and
No.
and dial it in with this type of amplifier. But I don't know of any that are tube amps where you could dial it like 8.1 impedance. 8.1 ohms.
I want to jump in here and just be very biased and say, first of all, that's a bunch of BS.
What is?
Basically, the whole concept of being able to dial in for a specific impedance. Do me a favor, go to Jensen.com or Celestion.com or one of the speaker websites. Bring up a chart, the technical data chart on that speaker. Look at an 8 ohm speaker.
No, this is an amp.
Well, I know, but he's saying the speaker's impedance is not constant.
It's never.
It varies from dozens of ohms in the low frequency, bottoms out at somewhere around its rated impedance, and then goes up again at high frequencies.
Yeah, all over
so
the
it
place.
isn't a simple thing to match an amp to a speaker. tube amps always did have that impedance conversion, switch or plug, because they are kind of dialed in to produce their maximum power point into a stated impedance, but it's still a very rough approximation.
And if you drop below that impedance, you have too much current, and that's what burns up. If your amp is set for 8 ohms and you run a 4 ohm cabinet, the resulting current and heat will destroy your output transformer. You can always run, you could have your amp set at 8 ohms and you can run a 16 ohm speaker and you won't have any safety issues. You cannot go the other ways. Well, yeah, the tubes will go faster, but for the most part...
So there is a happy medium.
An 8 ohm speaker, an 8 ohm speaker, its nominal impedance at one point within its frequency range will be 8 ohms. It'll also be 20 ohms, 40 ohms, 60 ohms over its spectrum, its frequency spectrum.
And if I could jump in, this is...
I'm just asking a simple question. Since this dial-in capability, at least with solid-state amps, exists now, and that's what major manufacturers, at least the ones that I've seen, are representing to pro audio consumers, exist. Is that something that we will see, or would be an advantage with a tube amp? Is that even possible? I don't know if it is.
If I may jump in. First off, pro audio power amps don't have impedance selectors. I mean, it's a voltage source. The more you put speakers you hang on it, the more sound you get, up to a point, and then the amp either goes into protection or, in the old days, it would break. It's sort of...
This is an electro voice product, so it's not some obscure company.
Okay, I mean, there are things, for instance, QSC is now embarking on a program to make amps with a programmable output impedance, but it's mostly to cover real extremes, like 70-volt ceiling speakers versus a 2 ohm subwoofer or something. And, those are at huge opposite ends of the spectrum. But I think we can lay this to rest by just saying, 8, 16, 4, I mean, these are approximations, and that's about as close as you're going to get, really, because the speaker itself varies so much. It changes with temperature, too. The impedance can almost double when a speaker is at its maximum operating temperature. So you kind of get it in the zone, and then you kind of you get what you get.
Yeah, you're asking if it's going to be, guitar amps are going to be doing this kind of thing. The answer is no. It's a marketing tool, and the reality is tube amps are very forgiving with this mismatch. We actually purposely mismatch transformers and tubes sometimes because we like the way it sounds. Now we have to compensate for the heat things we're talking about, but we go for just the way it sounds. And honestly, you don't want a user changing stuff around in an amp that has 400 or 500 volts in it. It's just dangerous as hell. And you're going to blow the thing up, and then I'm going to have to fix it and pay for it to ship. So we're not going to do it. I'm not going to do it.
Go ahead, Tracy.
I think another important thing to really take into account with what you're saying is a lot of times it's, especially with tube amp design, it's really not as finite as people would like to think, because you can take an Excel spreadsheet, you can plug in all these formulas to tell you what the output impedance and the input impedance is, and should you match it and should you not match it. But in reality, there's also tolerances on resistors and capacitors. So while you mathematically on paper, it may look very great, hey, this is awesome. In reality, when you factor in the tolerances and when things heat up, and will certainly change as well, you really don't have something that's that mathematically, finite. You can't really break it down that way. I mean, you'd like to think so, you can on paper, but the reality is it doesn't work that way, unfortunately. And some of it also comes down to what, when people are talking about looking at things on scopes and so forth, the thing that you can't always see is how does it feel? Does it feel good to you to play on? Do you want 10 gauge strings to feel like 11s or 12s? Everyone I know does not. And there's exceptions to every rule, okay? I'll just put that out there. But if you can make 10s feel like 8s or 9s, that's a trick. Does it involve matching impedances? Generally, no, and not throughout the circuit, it doesn't. So there's also things with just different types of components that may all be a .002 UF cap, for example, but 5 of those, all from a different manufacturer, are going to sound and feel different. And that's just one component, all throughout the amp. So really, I think the best way that I would look at, and I think what these gentlemen are also trying to get, is tone is the sum of the whole. You can do whatever your heart desires with the amp, but what about the guitar? What about the pickup? How about the height of the pickup? That height is going to radically change your tone and how much output comes out that jack as well. Frequency response is altered by that. So you can literally start right from there and go all the way down the chain, including the speakers, the cabinet on casters. This is sitting flush. It'll change everything, literally. And those are things that a lot of times people kind of zoom in and they focus a little too much on one thing without looking at the big picture. So I just think that, you know, going from this point forward, I think is important to realize that everything affects the tone, I mean, without a doubt.
So if you are attempting to try to get an overdrive in the trial to the gain stages of a preamp, just a preamp, let's say, and is it better then to try to have symmetrical sort of overdrive rounding of waveform, let's say, putting in a pure sine wave 440 hertz or whatever, or if you want an unsymmetrical, does that affect even non-harmonics?
That's personal preference.
I mean, I can say, yes, it matters a lot, and it is a personal preference. I myself kind of like the more symmetrical push-pull theory where it clips fairly evenly on the top and bottom, but that is a preference. And single-ended guys are probably looking for more asymmetry, which does generate more even harmonics, which, you know, give the sound I can describe it, sort of a forward quality, whereas the odd harmonics tend to have a brassy quality. So it's just a matter of what, you know, spices you want to put in the stew.
I mean, I'm sure that some of the people here listening to what's going on next door, some of the people are going, wow, that sounds pretty cool, I'm going to go over and listen to that. Other people are going, God, I wish I'd turned that shit down.
That's my artist, by the way. I'm sorry about that.
Oh. It's all personal preference. That's the beauty of music in and of itself. We have all these different genres and styles, and there's still 12 notes. It's how you do it. It's the same with tube amp design. It's really how you do it at the end of the day. And you can come up with a myriad of possibilities, even in one gain stage, you know, technically speaking. Yes, sir.
For the rig guy, I like to run 2 amps, and I just simply take the extra speaker jack, put it through a little resistor network, an isolation transformer, and plug it straight into the second amp. You see any problems with that, or is that a cool way to do it?
Did you blow it up?
Yeah, actually that's true. I mean, you know, yeah, I mean, you can run transformers. I've got a Sur ISO line out box that's up there that's just a small, you know, Zycon transformer, and that's all it is. And you'll see the phase reference on there and the ground reference, and that's.
And how much does phase matter? Because you get a certain distance.
Phase does matter. Oh, it absolutely matters. Yeah, I mean, you can ask any one of these guys too when they're talking about phase. You know, if you're talking about getting rid of bass or bringing bass in, or you know, getting
how
rid of
do you test phase? Just with your ear?
You know, I usually do it with my ear, but you know, there's a lot of people. You know, they're even better than I am. I mean, they can sit there and say, yeah, we can shift this 90 degrees off center. It's like, whoa, hold on.
Put the 2 amps right next to each other, play the first one, and then plug the second one in. If the sound feels hollowed out, you're out of phase. If it gets bigger and fuller, you're in phase.
Okay, great. Now, does all that go out the window when you start adding effects in between the 2 amps? Because
yes, effects will change the phase dramatically, and in who knows what way. So, you know, that's now you're in the creative zone of just coloring whatever you want to color.
That's why we take the dry signal out of the effects most of the time, is because we don't want the phase at all. And you'll run into that if you have multiple processors, like we're running a 20-space rig, 20-space rack upstairs. And you'll find out real quick that we've removed the dry from every single one of those effects processors, and we're running a separate dry signal off that reference, that sort of ISO line out box that we're talking about. We're also running a Palmer as a load, which everybody probably hates here. I apologize, guys.
I thought the industry standard though was to keep everything in phase.
That is what you do. Yeah.
So if you're a good product, you're supposed to keep it in phase.
But you know what happens is you get a product, especially when you're dealing with processors and things like that. What ends up happening is there's a slight latency
And you're going to find that either way, and I think that's what Pat's probably talking about too, is the slightly
Well, and who knows with fuzz pedals and whatnot, do they actually pay attention to positive phase?
Even
I mean,
on
I don't
simple
know.
products, if you take a typical Fender blackface amp and put it next to a Marshall Plexi era non-master volume amp, the two amps are not going to be in phase.
If you put two Fender amps, a Fender with reverb and a Fender with not reverb, out of phase.
Yeah.
Phase cancellation, you know?
You'll see that a lot too. I'm sorry. You'll see that a lot too with, like we'll use squint mode MOSFET power amplifiers, and then you're using a standard, amplifier as your dry center channel. You'll find that a lot of times too. It's going to be out of phase, and you're going to have to adjust that phase.
I think the pro audio industry finally got this kind of straight 10 or 20 years ago. So hopefully all modern pro audio amps are, pin too high, positive voltage in equals positive voltage out. But guitar amp people never worried about that. And who knows? I mean, they were, trying to make something that didn't blow up and produced a certain sound.
Exactly. If you have a Fender with reverb. Yeah. No, even a Fender amp that has reverb, if the phase from the reverb channel and the normal channel are out of phase with each other, so you can't run both.
You have the transformer between the two.
Every triode that
you have a balanced transformer and just shift the phase between the two channels.
I didn't.
Well, you take the second output of the reverb channel and just put a phase transformer to the phase shift. Go balance and.
So he's using a transformer to swap the phase.
Yeah.
That
sounds
technically
a lot of work.
possible. Yeah, like a Y chord that inverts one signal.
I suppose, but I hate. I hate putting anything in there that's not part of the circuit.
Do they make transformers that will really handle a guitar output transparently?
No.
That's a genuine question. I don't know.
No,
I use the T09. I have no problems with it at all. I mean, I've never heard anybody complain about it. Tamura. And then Zycon, again, Sir uses Zycon on a regular basis. Custom Audio used to use Zycon as well on MET09.
So these are very high impedance.
Yeah, well, yeah, if you get it, there's 600K ohm, 10K ohm. Okay. So you're looking low impedance on some sides of it and then high impedance on the other sides of it.
As I know, the output of guitar pickups is very delicate, and you really need a high impedance to keep the high frequencies intact.
So speaking of time, I've got a 1955 GA20 that sounds great, and I like to think that we get better as we get older. I'm concerned about this interval. I keep it maintained. I don't service it myself, but I'm concerned about this Jensen speaker that's got the transformer on itself. When do I know that speaker is maybe that I should, for value, say, take it out of the amp, not play it, replace it with another speaker to still dial in the great tone, if that's possible, or just accept the fact that these, like all things, nothing lasts forever, and the amp's going to die one of these days.
Is this a field coil speaker?
Yeah.
No, it's not a field coil.
Okay.
They mounted the transformer on.
Because there's a class of really old speakers where there's a huge electromagnet where and those are kind of integral to the amp. You can't just swap them out. But yours, it's a good question.
Your question is, just play it till it blows, because nothing's going to sound as good, and nothing is going to sound as good.
It's amazing how long speakers last. I have 30s radios and my brother's 1940 Valco, and they still play fine. The speakers do.
I mean, look for a replacement on eBay when they come up, and just buy it and stick it in the closet. Because once they're gone, there's so many people who recone speakers. I never hear the same thing out of it. I just don't.
Just enjoy it for long.
Yeah, but it's not. You could probably get a speaker that will sound great. A modern speaker that would sound great, it will just not sound like that. Yeah. You have to adjust your mind like that's okay. This is what it sounds like now.
It's going to be like
play to that sound.
Going to be like refinishing your guitar, your Martin. It's different, and it may age again into the sound you remember from 40 years ago, but it does change it.
Do you take it out and play it in gigs and stuff?
No, it's not loud enough for gigs, really.
Well, this is a situation where I've blown speakers because I played a gig and then put the amp in a truck, and it was freezing outside, and the speaker died because it was going from hot to cold. it broke something, you know. So if you're just sitting in your room and keeping it, it should be fine, you know.
Every chord's great.
Yeah, just love it while it's there.
Yeah, that's
Love
sort
the
of-
one you're with.
And, you know, shameless product plug. One of our missions at Quilter Labs is to give you an amp you can take out so you can keep your valuable, you know, tone standards safely at home.
But I rolled out last night at a gig with my 65 Super Reverb. I can't build an amp that good. I know how to build amps. I can't build an amp that sounds that good. It just got the thing. I don't know. You know, it's just. It's old and it just wants to go out and play. I love it.
With all these variables in the production environment, how do you get 100 amplifiers to all sound the same?
Well, being a small building.
Guess what? They don't.
You don't make 100 amplifiers.
I mean, speakers vary by 1 or 2 dB. You know, that's the one of the brutal facts of our thing. You know, we have this same problem at QSC as we do in guitar amps. They each one does sound a little different. You set limits, and if it's within the limit, it's good, and if it's outside, you say, sorry, that one's a reject.
Yeah, genetically they're the same. They have blonde hair and they have blue eyes, but they're not exactly the same, you know. We can build 20 amps from the same run of parts, and they'll be a little different. There'll be one that stands out, and the others are great, but not.
I'll take that one.
Well, ideally, yeah. But, you know, there's no way to control down to the, because we like to use carbon comp resistors, and they're all over the map as far as rating, you know, and that extrapolates through the amplifier. You know, if this is 20% down, then it's, you know, as it goes to the next stage, that whatever that frequency is 40% down, and then 100%. So
Usually they don't. You know, they vary in different directions, so it sort of averages out. But you know, you could get one unit that happened to have all minuses in it, and then you've got one that's kind of an outlier and might have to do something with it.
I mean, I can hear the difference, but if you buy an amplifier, it's, you know, of a particular model, it's going to sound like that model. You know, it's not going to sound radically different. But if you get 10 of them and you play 10 of them, you'll find 2 that you like better than the other.
It's like going into the store with all the color TVs going. I mean, they all have pretty good color, but they don't look the same.
We see that with preamps a lot too. A lot of times you'll get, you know, one company puts out a preamp, Custom Audio Electronics did this for a while with the 3 Plus SE and 3 Plus. But we get like 4 of them in a room, and all 4 of them would sound absolutely different. And then we'd have 4 different power amplifiers, and all 4 of those, you know, power amplifiers would sound different. Everything just comes into play, and I think Trace said it, you know, earlier. You know, everything comes into it, and it's based on what you think, and that goes back to your question as well on speakers. If you're looking for speakers for yourself, that's one thing, but you know, you also see a lot of companies that will trend watch, and all of a sudden you'll see a certain speaker hit with that. So like we saw this with Vintage 30s, probably like 10 years ago or something like that, where everybody had Vintage 30s. There was not one company that didn't, so the price of Vintage 30s went down drastically. So everybody was buying it. So,
but Eric, you have a Super Reverb that I worked on, right? It's got lower blackface. I have a couple. He has one. It's lower powered than most. I don't know why. It's in the transformer. It's a beautiful amp. It's an amazing sounding amp. And as much as I know about amplifiers, I can't make that happen. I can't make it. I can't duplicate that. You know. So it's, if you find an amp of yours that sounds beautiful, just leave it alone. You know. And I get all the time when I do repairs, I get beautiful versions of old amps, like it's immaculate. And I play it, it sounds like crap. It sounds like crap. And the ones that are perfect condition have always sounded like crap. Because they came from the factory sounding like crap. And that's why they're sitting around, they weren't used. And I find mistakes from the factory that 50 years nobody's found this mistake. And I was like, that's not right. I look at it, I've seen 1,000 amps, it's like, that's the wrong part. How did nobody find this? You know, it's this beautiful amp, and you change it to the correct part, and you give it back to the guy, and it blows his minds, because it's finally sounding right.
Johnny Martin's been playing a music room for decades. I was wondering if I think it's an HP or something.
Yeah, HP 130.
Is that equivalent to any Fender model?
No, not really.
It's just its own animal?
Well, they're pretty similar actually, except I would say it's a little bit more powerful than a twin. You know, it's kind of the twin base. The HD series, which is the first Music Man that had tubes, preamp, and tube output. Then they went to solid state preamp, tube output. Then they went to tube preamp. You know, they just the original HDs, 65 and HD 130s with tube amps by Leo Fender, and they're very, very Fender-like. You know, they have a couple little tweaks, but they use 6L6s.
So you can probably play
Yeah, and I mean, they would melt tubes. You know, the first ones. You know.
I think it was 6 CA7s. You know, I built a few tube amps back in the day to figure out what the deal was, and you know, I was a hot shot kid. I was kind of move the needle on the state of the art, but yeah, there were some very hot tubes in the back of the tube book that were like worth 100 watts a pair, and they were the size of 6L6s, and yes, they melted.
I was just gonna say we actually saw Albert Lee's. You'd start seeing the Tolex start bubbling, and next thing you know, you'd see a little bit of flame, and then, you know, no more Music Man, and then he's like, "I need another Music Man amp, please."
Yeah, I mean, I assume that's why they went to these hybrids. You know, because I mean, I own one of those first, and one of the greatest things that I remember is I went to them and said, "Hey, this amp blew up." They changed the tubes for me, and said no charge. So. At 65, we do the same thing. You know, if you bought the amp from me, I'm going to take care of it for you. I'm not going to charge you for something that failed in it. You know, so it was something that stuck with me over the years.
I'm going to call an official end to this because we've run over by about 30 minutes, and so you might want to go off, but you can still interact with these folks. And if they want to run off and go to whatever, they can. Feel free to run
The only thing I'd just like to add is, and I think the mathematic equation is tone equals the sum of the whole.
Right. Everything's going to matter.